Hey, and welcome to MWise, everybody. I'm excited to be here, and I want to kick off. Maybe if we could get the slides up. I want to kick off with this talk, Engineers Not Jedi, with a quiz, and so we'll do that in a second. But since we've got a small room, let's be interactive. If you want to jump in, give me feedback or ask questions as we go, that's awesome. And we will have slides in just a second. All right, so my little quiz at the start here is, how many Jedi do you see in this picture? Anyone? Just call out a number. Anyone? Zero. Very good. There are no Jedi in this picture. How about this one? Still zero. Very good. No wonder he's a speaker tomorrow. So there are no Jedi, and this is an important theme because a revolution, a rebellion, doesn't just take Jedi Knights. It actually takes a breadth of people with different skills, different backgrounds, working together to achieve some sort of goal. And in security, we talk a lot about Jedi. These were two headlines that I pulled up out of a great many where people were, how to find cybersecurity Jedi, how to become a cybersecurity Jedi. And this goal, this aspiration we have of fighting the bad guys, being the heroes, is admirable. I don't want to undercut it, except I do. It's actually a bad goal because not everyone wants to be a hero. Expectations of heroism drive burnout. We have a big burnout problem in cybersecurity where people are in these firefighting response modes, especially right now where some of this involves nation-state conflict. People are burning out at an unsustainable rate. And, frankly, not everyone wants to be torn from their family as a child to go to the Jedi Academy. They don't want to live without attachments. And some people don't even have the right blood to be Jedi Knights. They don't have the thing that lets them do the Force. And so, I'll introduce myself quickly. I've been in security for over 25 years. Earlier, I do a lot of work in threat modeling today with my company, Shostack and Associates. Earlier in my career, I helped create the CVE. I'm on the review board for Black Hat. I'm an affiliate professor at the University of Washington. And so a lot of people know my threat modeling work, but I try to think more broadly about how do we make security work better for everyone. And so what I want to talk about today is my understanding of the root cause of the problem, which is software. There's this idea that we're going to shift left, but it's not working well. And so I really want to talk about what reasonable expectations we ought to have of the people around us so that we can support them as they do the things that need to happen to make our businesses work. And I'll talk about a bunch of very specific tools that I use that you can also use to help the people around you. And so we've known for a long time that all programs are buggy. And this, by the way, is from Firewalls and Internet Security, the first edition, 1994. And so what Cheswick and Belvin said is that large programs are buggy, and they're even buggier than you'd expect, and therefore we need firewalls to protect us from that buggy code, to protect that buggy code from the big bad internet. And, I don't think they were wrong, but I think that we can think about this a little bit better today than we could nearly 30 years ago. And so I want to go with the question of where do bugs come from? And my very simple answer to where do bugs come from is developers. We pay them to write the bugs, we pay them to take the bugs out. But if we want fewer bugs, we should be doing things to influence the developers. Or if we want to be more modern about it, it's software engineers. And I use the term software engineer broadly. This is people who write code, people who operate code, people who plan, project manage, all of these things that we do to create, deploy, and operate our systems at scale are where the bugs come from. There's a bunch of problems that developers introduce. So there's code that has security problems. There's missing security features. Can't tell you how often I see an API endpoint where someone forgot to log, forgot to authenticate, believed that it would be okay because no one would ever find it. And there's also unusable security features. If we don't partner with usability people as we're developing our security features, Heidi and that was giving me the password. I couldn't type the password for the conference in today, and I commented on this. We need our security features to be usable, or people will try to bypass them. So when I think about software, I think about development and production, and I think about the security work that we layer on top of it, which includes application security and operational security. And in development, we add and remove security features like SSL. And in production, we add this fire hose of CVEs that we have to deal with and manage all day long. And so we've got a bunch of things we do on the operational security side. We deploy SIEMs, we put firewalls in place. We build these penetration testing practices to find bugs, and ideally to be a gate between development and security. But in practice, it's just an escalation over risk trade-off, right? We're going to deploy whatever the pen test happens to say. And so we really need to be over on the application security side. Look at that, I've got bugs in my animation because bugs are bugs. I'm going to skip over that. And so on the application security side, we have things like fuzzing, we have things like static analysis, we have language improvements that we might use, and all of these things help us ship code with fewer bugs. And we describe this as shifting security left. And the meaning of the idea of shifting security left is that we go all the way back to when it's being created so that we have fewer problems. And here at MWise, there's a lot of people who are on the operational side, and if you want to just extend this slide all the way over here to incident response, a lot of people here in this bucket of I can't control what goes into production, I can't control what gets developed or acquired. And so a lot of the pain that we feel in this role of response comes from the fact that stuff over there is happening, and we need to shift what we're doing so that we have more influence over it. And so, summarize this part just a little bit. When we think about building security this is changes. We were talking about this right before, right? That it's change that's happening. It's not just the technical thing, it's the human thing which is going on. We're asking other people to change how we, or really they, design, develop, and deploy code. And this requires new skills. It requires less of an emphasis on penetration tests, more on software engineering. And this shift left thing is growing in popularity. And the fundamental reason is when you've already poured your concrete, it's hard to make changes to the foundation of the building. It's really expensive. Before you've poured, it's cheap. After you've poured, it's expensive. And this applies to software because someone's written the feature that you're saying should be ripped out. Someone's written the code that needs to be refactored. And that costs money. And it costs us time because instead of shipping on schedule, we're shipping late. And I was talking to someone, big company, you all do business with them, and they said, yeah, we just met a development team that wanted to deploy to Google Cloud for the first time. We've never deployed to Google Cloud. And we walked them through all of the stuff we do in Azure, and they said, I don't see what of that we can cut and still ship. And so this announced feature set that they were really excited about shipped 3 quarters late. And nobody disagreed that it should ship 3 quarters late. That's awful, right? Nobody wants to be in that boat. So we want to shift left. And sometimes when we shift left, it ends up being a bit like this. The security guy in orange is trying to shift left, and the fellow on the right is like, hang on, what's going on? What's happening here? I don't like this. Really, we should all be playing on the same team. We should be focused on the same goal. And so this really implies that we need to change the development process. And as we change the development process, we need clear responsibilities. If I'm going to change your job and say, you should do security now, and at the end of the year, you're going to get a bonus based on how much security you did, you're going to look at me and say, Adam, could you be a little more specific about how you're going to decide my bonus? And that's a legitimate request, right? People want specifics. So what's changing might be the deliverables. Maybe I'm delivering code in a different language that's safer. Maybe the tasks I'm doing are different. I'm going to go through a static analysis process, and I'm going to have a task of checking off all the static analysis issues. Maybe I need new skills, or maybe this is getting rolled out, and I see this over and over again, is companies roll out these AppSec processes, but they never explain the why. And so the goal is, I have to do this to please those AppSec guys over there, or they come and yell at me. And anyone who's doing work to avoid being yelled at is going to find the cheapest, least useful thing that they can do and just get it done so they can say, no, look, I did the thing you wanted, it's right there. And so I think that the thing we need to clarify is who's delivering what to whom and how. And I sometimes will joke that this is my entire job these days, is asking this question over and over again and helping people understand who's delivering what, when, and how, so that we can deliver products better. Because these changes are changes to the fundamental ways that companies do business. And if we're going to change them, we need to respect that. So one tool that I'm super fond of is Bloom's Taxonomy. And I'm going to walk through this. You do not need to remember all of this. You do not need to read this whole slide. I'm just presenting it and then walking through it. Bloom's Taxonomy is a fundamental thing that people use in education. We use it to define goals. We use it to do assessments, or as you might have heard about them, tests or quizzes. And the idea is that we start at the bottom of the pyramid at a stage like remember, which is all about recalling basic facts and concepts. We use verbs like define and duplicate and list to explain what someone has to do. So be able to define that data over a network can be read by anyone. And as we go up the stack, as we get up to like analyze, we expect people to be able to draw connections between ideas. We use verbs like differentiate or organize or relate. And how does authentication relate to authorization? How does information disclosure relate to tampering? And when we're talking at this level of abstraction, this is an advanced activity. This is not something that you would ask of a junior person necessarily, because this is actually difficult work that people need to learn how to do. And then up at the top of the pyramid, things like evaluate, justifying a stand or a decision, arguing, defending, judging. We do a lot of this in application security where we say, you know, I don't think this is ready to go, or I don't think this is safe enough because, and we learn this very much in an apprenticeship model where we learn what these arguments look like, but we don't necessarily learn to have them consistently. We don't teach people what it is they should be doing, what a good argument contains. We expect them to come in with that. Then at the very top, there's new or original work. And I have one more eye chart sort of slide for you, but the only thing that I want you to take from this is that there exist these very powerful tools like Bloom's question stems. So if you're in remembering, make a concept map, write a list of keywords you know about. Remembering, just the facts, what happened, how many, what is. And if you form your education like this, or using these verbs to help you, hint, at the end, I'm going to suggest we need to get way more specific about how we teach, how we educate, what we expect of people. And tools like this, which you can look up later, the slides will be available, tools like this really focus our attention on what that looks like. And in security, you know, I used a little black hat from another conference. At the top, when people are creating new work, they come and speak. When they're evaluating systems, they do penetration tests. And lower down, we have developers who don't want or aspire to be Jedi Knights. They aspire to be great developers, writing good code that's efficient, bug-free, and they have time and energy for security, but they have limits to their time and energy. And, you know, a lot of times we end up teaching a little bit like this. We've got some old guy on our back lecturing us about how good he looks at 900, and I'm like, how do I prevent a buffer overflow in my code? Am I logging enough? And then he has us suspend boxes in the air while standing on our heads, which makes for a great training montage, right? But as an actual practical method of training, this is not very useful. But it's where we go when we focus on Jedi Knights. It's, if this is a developer standing on their head, and I've talked to developers, and in fact I use this slide because a developer once told me, the security training you're putting me through is like stand on your head for 5 minutes, and I don't know why I'm standing on my head, but I have to go do this thing. And so I was like, I got a slide for that. And so it's super important that we start getting really explicit about the criteria for knowledge we expect of people, that we think about the constraints that we apply to that knowledge. So we have to align to the job and aspirations. And this is really the point of the how many Jedi slides, is to hold a rebellion, we need fighter pilots, we need guys who are going to run around in camouflage, we need mechanics to maintain the fighter planes, we need cooks who are going to help us run the base. All of these skills, all of these professions are valuable. You know, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have my support team in the back getting the presentation to work for me. All of these skills are valuable, and we expect different things of people. And so we have to express what those are, and then we have to actually say what's involved in making that happen. And so the goals that I think are important are we help people find and follow paved roads. And, you know, this morning, if you saw Phil Venables on stage, Phil, back when he was working at a bank, talked about a system of gates and nets. And his idea was we allow people to do whatever dangerous stuff they want, and we try and deploy some nets so if they fall off the tightrope, we'll catch them. And if enough people are falling into a given net, we'll put a gate in front of that tightrope so only certain people are allowed to use it. And that concept of helping people do the job they're doing rather than getting in their way all the time is really valuable. Recognizing danger signs is valuable. And when we teach in security, we often end up teaching and telling people things like, hey, there are some great books on this subject. And so I love every one of these books, by the way, don't get me wrong. But you'll notice they are not thin books, they are not small books, except for the one at the top, Extreme Programming Explained, which is so thin you might not even have noticed it was there. The reason that it's there is to compare and contrast. I think the most impactful is the thinnest. And so we really need to think about this in terms of what fits for developers. And I think we're doing a really poor job of this today. We are overwhelming them with bits that they don't know how to organize, bits that they don't know how to make good use of. So there's another concept which is important, and that's chunking. Our brains are insanely good at pattern recognition. They deal with information in chunks. So you may have heard that our human memory is 7 plus or minus 2. It's actually plus or minus 2 chunks. And so if you look at that list of numbers, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and you don't know anything about it, you're overwhelmed by it. Or if you know that it's a Fibonacci sequence, you can just look at it and be like, oh, that's a Fibonacci sequence, and move on. And if you really know Fibonacci sequences, you'll know that I'm trolling you because I left a number out. And the people who know what a Fibonacci sequence are like, there's a bug there, because you can see it, right? And you're nodding, because it's right there in front of you, because your brain is really good at this. You probably did not bother to say, did Adam enter a Fibonacci sequence correctly? Our brains define patterns so incredibly powerfully that if we don't define them, our students will. And they might do it anyway. You know, if you look, like there's pictures from Mars that people say look like Kermit the Frog or a face. These are natural rock formations. Nobody went there and carved a Kermit the Frog. But our brains see these things because our brains are really powerfully good at this. And so I'm going to argue that we ought to define what those chunks are. And I think we're doing so today, but we're doing so in a lot of different ways. So, you know, for example, if you go to Black Hat, there's a real focus on exploit techniques. And there's an argument that developers should know exploit techniques. There's people who want to teach about threat actors. There's people who want to focus on compliance. Cyber war is in the news. It's available. It's easy to tag things on. There's top 10 lists. There's lots of possibilities. And I believe that threats are a really powerful tool for helping people understand these things. And in the time allotted, I don't have time to work through each of these. I'll leave some time for questions if we want to come back to it. But for me, a threat is an answer to the question, is a promise of future violence. It's an answer to the question, what can go wrong, rather than a threat actor. And what can go wrong focuses our attention on these threats. And I found over my years in this industry that just asking what can go wrong is insanely powerful. Everybody I talk to has an answer. I talk to executives who their staff are like, oh God, no, Bob grew up before computers. He doesn't know this stuff. And it turns out Bob actually has some good answers if you give him time and encourage him to share those answers rather than just making that assumption. And variance, like what keeps you up at night, how would you attack this? all of these help you get to this heart of what can go wrong that everyone can answer. Oops, what can go wrong is I'm hitting the wrong button. Let's see if I can do this. Here we are. It's an umbrella that we can think about. And if we're really open-ended and just ask what can go wrong, our answers are going to vary a lot. And so we can use structures to get to more consistency. So I was working with a bank not too long ago, and they settled on operational risk exchange. It's a organization in Sweden that does banking risk information, and they share it out. In security, we think about the OWASP top 10. The FDA's answer to what can go wrong, an inability to update things, looms very large in their new medical device guidance. And then there's a compliance answer, and I gave a talk at Black Hat Asia on threat modeling compliance, which is relevant. But when I think about what can go wrong, I really think about it as what are the flaws in this system that are going to be very hard to correct once we've poured the concrete. Once we've built the system, it's hard to make changes. And so this leads me to the question of what's the single best tool set? If we go to developers and say, hey, there's 6 different ways to do this, 4 different ways to do this, I have to analyze, compare, evaluate between these. And I got email yesterday from some guy, and he's like, I have this question about threat modeling. And I said, have you watched my little course on LinkedIn or read my book or anything? And I wasn't trying to push him off. I was just trying to figure out where he was coming from. And he came back and he said, I've read over 100 papers on threat modeling, and I still don't understand how to integrate them all. And it became really clear from his question that he had never actually threat modeled. And so he's trying to do this thing up here at the evaluate level, and he doesn't have the basic skills that underpin the work that he's doing. And so I'm going to have to figure out how to respond to the gent and give him some useful advice. But people need experts to offer useful advice. So I was looking for an analogy for this, and I went to personal finance. And I was looking for good advice on personal finance. Things like max out your tax advantage account. So your 401k account, you should max out. It's good for you. And then I went searching, and I found this article, 50 personal finance tips that will change the way you think about money. I said, 50? Seriously? I'm going to read 50 tips to find a couple of bullet points to stick into a slide? I don't want to do that. That's way too much work. And then I thought about target date funds. And target date funds, if you're not familiar with them, are this thing where your bank, Fidelity, Vanguard, whoever, will say, you're going to retire in 2040. Here's a fund for you. It's got 60% bonds and 40% stocks, or whatever the ratio is. And every year they'll adjust those numbers a little bit so they're appropriate for someone who's retiring in 2040. It's a really easy way. You don't have to think about any question except when do I hope to retire. You can use a target date fund. And when I compare that, when I'm going to go backwards here, when I compare that to asking non-security people questions like this, why are we asking non-security people to evaluate between these things? Why are we asking them to pick between things like this? We ought to be coming up with answers as an industry, as a profession, where we consistently tell people who are getting into the field what the equivalent of tax advantaged funds or target date funds are. And so this question really leads me to the question, what does every engineer need to know? There's a couple of projects that I've been working on that really filter into this. So I wrote a white paper a year or so ago called Fast, Cheap, and Good. It's freely available. And it's all about the least effort ways to threat model, right? How do we make this something you can do in 5 minutes? I'm working on a new book. The subtitle is What Every Engineer Should Learn from Star Wars. And so what does every engineer need to know is a question that I grapple with every time I write a paragraph. And I've got like 50 pages of stuff that is not in the book that I wrote. And then I cut because I said, everybody doesn't need to know that. Everybody doesn't need to know that. So that it's a short, accessible book. But this question of what every engineer needs to know, I have my answers. You have your answers, implicitly or explicitly. And I think we need to be talking about what we need people to know so that we can get towards the target date fund. And so all of this actually started even with a simpler question than what does every engineer need to know? And that simpler question is every flaw unique, right? Is everything we find a unique snowflake, or does it have some commonality? And if it has commonality, does it have clusters? And if there are clusters, what do we need to know to find those clusters? Because if we can figure out what we need to know, we can figure out where the flaws are, then we can get better at finding them. And so I started thinking about this in terms of how much system knowledge is required, which is the vertical axis, and how much security expertise is required. And one way to think about this world is that it's a completely uniform space. That for any amount of security knowledge and system knowledge, there are flaws waiting to be found there. That's legitimate. There's another view, which is that more security expertise helps you find more bugs. And the more system knowledge you have, you also get more bugs. And this, I think of this as the penetration testing hypothesis, that security knowledge is the powerful thing which we can vary. And the more security knowledge we have, the more we're going to find. And then there's my actual hypothesis, which is that most bugs are actually pretty easy to find. Most flaws are pretty easy to find. And so they cluster down at the low level of expertise in both. And my argument for this empirically is that quick penetration tests and bug bounties wouldn't work if you needed a lot of system knowledge. And if you need a huge amount of security knowledge, there's only a few people with that, and so crowdsourcing doesn't work well. So my argument, I think, is somewhat empirically grounded, that flaws are easy to find. And this leads me to the belief that if lightweight flaws are common, we should transform how we're working with engineers. And if they are common, I'm going to speed up just a little bit to make sure there's a little time for questions at the end. Why do flaws exist? Maybe it's because developers suck. I know a lot of people in the security world who think that's true. Maybe it's because we have bad tools. Maybe it's because we lack knowledge. And surprise, surprise, at this point, I think lack of knowledge is actually crucial. And so, my belief about what developers need to know is they need to know STRIDE. STRIDE's a framework we use a lot in threat modeling, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and expansion of authority. And I am shifting from a privilege-centered version of E to the authority-centered version because I think it's more precise and useful. I think parsing and predictability are important concepts for developers to understand. Parsers are dangerous. And that kill chains bring these things together. And I think if developers know these either 3 or 9 things, depending on how you want to count STRIDE, we will get much better code, we will get much better systems, we will get much better operational systems as a result. to skip over this and this. Let's see. So if we think about this as a framework, if we believe that code issues really do underlie most security issues, then shifting left might just be an admirable goal, but it's only going to work when we're clear about change, because we're asking every developer, every operator, every SRE to do their job differently, to change what they prioritize, to change how they're evaluated, to change where they get their bonus. And that is a years-long task. We have to understand that it's going to be difficult. Slightly more difficult than consistently hitting the right button even. And I think there's a future that we can really think about and aspire to. If we define what security is more crisply, more precisely, more actionably, then developers are going to be more able to build more secure systems. Operators can run systems that are going to be more secure. We can do less rework. We can do less rework across the entire operational pipeline. All of us in the last couple of years have gone through a process of rebuilding our systems to work in a remote first world. It was really hard, but everyone understood it needed to happen, and so it was possible to do at really accelerated speeds. But that rework can only happen on an occasional basis when there's a really clear threat and prioritization that's happening. So less rework, fewer escalations. Fewer escalations, I think, are an incredibly important part of the future. And that is, maybe you've been in this scenario. Somebody shows up, they say, I didn't do the thing security asked me to do, but we need to ship, it's important to the CEO, can I get an exception? Yeah, some of you have been here, okay. Why does that happen? It happens because developers are allowed to say, I didn't know I needed to do this. It happens because we have authority divided up separately from accountability and responsibility. And if we want to move responsibility to different people and say, you need to do this before you can ship, and you can make the call on whether or not you can ship, but that'll be evaluated. They need to know what they're going to be evaluated on, or they're not going to accept the responsibility. And that shift, me of 20 years ago, me of 30 years ago, would say, this is boring management talk, but I have come to believe that this is actually a crucial part of our jobs, that doing this better leads to less rework, fewer escalations, more predictable delivery. And so to make it actionable, again, we need to define expectations. And I've defined mine, and I'm continuing to define mine in public. I have opinions. But also, I am here today to make the case that this is not just something Adam should do, something you should do, you should do. Each of you should be doing this and sharing your answers in blog posts, in talks, in white papers, in books, whatever form you feel is right. Get the answers out there so we can have a conversation which is going to lead us to consistency of expectations, so that those expectations aren't, well, I went and Googled what do I need to know about security and I found this and it was good enough for me then. We are going to need to help people meet them. We need to train people. We need to assess them. And this is where those tools like Bloom's taxonomy comes in so incredibly handy. is we can use them to inform the development of training processes, and we can measure impact. We can look at the number of security changes that we need to real systems after they ship. We can look at the number of intrusions that our risk management processes didn't predict. We can look at the places where activity varies from the kill chains that we understood as we were deploying things. Attacker activity deviates, I mean. And so all of this, I think, is feasible, actionable, and I would love for you all to join me in this journey. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for your attention. And I am happy to take questions either right now or drop me email. My email address is right there, and again, the slides are available. So, thank you very much. Question? Yes?
I have a question about incentives. So you talked about using things like escalations as a way to justify the investment in threat modeling, especially when working with large distributed engineering teams. One of the challenges I've sometimes seen is that the costs borne on response work are from a separate part of the organization than the ones actually doing the building. And so they don't actually realize any gain because a security team completely organizationally distinct is going to deal with all the firefighting and cleanup. How have you found organizations successfully navigating sort of that split?
It's a great question. So the first thing is that the organization has to recognize what it's doing, right? If the organization is making the decision that security is a separate budget and there's no impact to people who made the choices that lead to those security issues, that's going to be a problem forever. And so the CEO needs to know about that, and the board needs to know about that. We talk a lot about what does the board need to know. The board needs to know that the team that's building the car and the team that fixes the car at the end of the production line are getting charged to separate cost accounts. The second thing I think is pride in work. I don't know any engineer who says, I want to ship shitty code. But they don't know what good looks like to me as a security person, and so they don't try. You're welcome. Good question. Thank you.